So Pete, after all that experience in music and the electronic music lab and audio engineering, after college, how did you move from all of that experience into actual audio engineering?
Well, I probably, like a lot of people, was very confused about what the hell to do with myself after I graduated from a 4-year university, especially with something as obtuse as a degree in electronic music composition. Oh boy. So strangely enough, I floundered around with a number of different, stupid jobs, and got back into playing music as a bass player. And was doing a few things. I moved back to my hometown of Rochester, New York. Moved in with my parents, and it was probably about a week that we both looked at each other and said, "This shit ain't happening." So I moved in with some musical friends, and tried the band thing for a bit, and then I ended up moving to Boston, probably after a year or something of that magnitude after I graduated from college, to play music with some friends who I had known since I was a kid. We're going to Boston, and we're living in Boston and playing music at the time. So I moved to Boston, and just before I moved to Boston, I met this guy who you will know, Barry Ober.
Ah.
Okay, and this is when I was still going to college in Albany.
What was the name of the band?
Oh, I don't even remember. There was a million bands.
No, the band you were in.
Well, again, there was several incarnations, several names, depending on who was fronting the band. We were piano, bass, and drums.
Right.
So, we were whores, and whatever style of music we needed and wanted to do, we would go that route for that period of time, whatever it was, a night, a month, a year. Anyway, so Barry hit me to this fantastic sounding new wacky wild place that he was building from the ground up with another whack job, another fellow who was a missile systems engineer at Raytheon there in Boston, right? So that's a recipe for something wild right there. So I was interested, and when I was in Boston playing with the aforementioned old comrades, I looked them up, and they were indeed doing something interesting, but it wasn't as technologically adventurous as Barry had hoped it would be, probably for monetary reasons. But anyway, to make a long story short, I was playing music by night the last few years out there in Boston, and by day I was engineering. Well, I had this background, but I started out as my title was Keeper of the Slime, which translates to being, you're like the day man. You do everything. You're an odd job guy. You'll fix the headphones. You'll empty the trash. You'll sweep the bathroom. You'll run the session. Whatever it takes. And it was a great training ground because it was another one of those places. Like, man, when I moved to LA, I was in Boston. I'm here just back. I spent 7 years in Boston, sort of doing, most of the 7 years I was in Boston doing those two things, playing music at night. And I got to play with all sorts of great things, including like the Boston Pops. I played with, wacky shit, everything from playing like the Ice Capades to...
Ice Capades.
Yeah, to playing in the Combat Zone, which is where all the strip clubs were.
Awesome.
So you had an incredibly varied and wonderful music background there as a musician. But I figured working at that particular studio, if you could get a session up and on the air and keep that ship afloat, you could go anywhere because you had enough depth of experience to, as I just intimated, that you would be able to prove your worth and, could be autonomous and work sort of anywhere. So when, I guess it was 1980 that I sort of had run out of what I felt was growing room as both an engineer and a musician there in Boston, even though it was great. I figured if I was going to stretch my wings, that was the time, right? So I had some friends who had moved to LA, and I looked at New York, because, Boston was a great music town, as I've been mentioning, but recording-wise, for people doing real frontline records, New York was so close that there weren't that many great studios that people were utilizing there in town. I got to work with Aerosmith one day, that type of thing, because they were one of Boston's big things. And who else? Bands that would go through town occasionally would use our studio mostly for they're on the road and they want to document what they're writing instead of waiting till they got home. And you got to remember, this is the 70s when having a portable recording setup in the back of the bus was not happening quite yet. So at any rate, when I stretched my wings and moved to Los Angeles, as I say, I felt empowered that I could go to almost anywhere, and I made myself a list out of the Mix magazine, and Mix magazine back then was a big format pulpy thing, not unlike what LA Weekly looks like today, if you know what LA Weekly looks like, depending on where you are. I made a list of 20 of the most happening studios with a Neve console. SSL wasn't even on the map at that point.
Wow.
API console. I figured if I'm gonna swing, I'm gonna swing for the fences here, right?
Yeah.
And the very first place that I actually went to, I ended up getting a job, and it was sort of through the back door. Before I got going there, I joined a band that needed a bassist, and there were a couple of very talented musicians in the band who were both great songwriters, and doing songwriting demos with a great engineer named Tim Doell, who you may or may not know.
Tim Doell.
Of course. Renowned, wonderful guy and renowned, wonderful engineer. I was doing sessions with the two guys in this band at this fantastic place called Wally Heider, which had studios both in San Francisco and Los Angeles. And they had remote recording. In fact, Wally was the guy who put remote on the map, everything from doing, Frampton Came Alive, for example. When the record labels figured out you could pay Wally a couple of grand to wheel the truck outside the venue and record a record that would go 12 times platinum. Maybe this is an idea that has legs, right? So they had remote. They had 8 recording studios. I mean, big ass studios. They had clients like Paul McCartney. They had clients like Ry Cooder. I think one of the very first things I got to do was with the remote. I got to record the USC marching band for Tusk.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, for Fleetwood Mac's iconic record. So they were doing all sorts of stuff, and they also, which ties in how you and I met, they did scoring there. They did big movie stuff and lots of TV. I mean, where we'd record a big band and whatnot. Lots of stuff. So it was all kinds of experience. They had mastering. They sort of had it all under one roof. So that was the place I kind of singled out. And as I was saying, I was doing these sessions with a guy who worked there, Tim Doell. And he saw, not only I would help him on the session, he saw that I had, energy and attitude and aptitude and all those kind of things. And he helped me get my first foot in the door, and I got a job at Wally Hyder's. And a company called Filmways was running the company at that time. And Wally, who had sold the rights to his name, was still around, right? And this is a tip for all wayward, hopefuls, really sort of in any career field. It's Wally noticed always whose car was there first and whose car left there last. Who was willing to put in the hours. And believe me, there wasn't any money to speak of at all back then. You were on a fixed whatever the hell it was, and it was subsistence wages until they really realized that you were worth something, and then all the values could change, right? So it was a wonderful place to start, and then I went to Sunset Sound, which is another world-renowned place that has done everything from the Doors to the Rolling Stones to Prince. I got to record 1999.
Nice.
I was one of a couple of people on that, and just another great experience. And from there, talk about connections. I was able to get a job at Capitol Records, which was another renowned place that did everything. Again, they had they didn't have remotes, but they did episodic TV. They did feature films. They did lots of great top line frontline records, commercials. They did everything. Mastering they had. So it was another insanely great place to work. And it was a fertile ground there. I was there for 15 years and got to do records with people like
Wow.
Miles Davis. I got to record the 2-2 album, which was probably the high watermark for yours truly. I got to work with, oh my God, you name it practically. Tons of Bob Seger records, records with people like Steve Vai and David Lee Roth and the Replacements. If we get to tell some stories here, I got some good stories.